Hey, what's up you guys, it's Dorothy and welcome back to my channel. In today's video we're going to go into chapter 8 of 4 Perfect Pebbles by Lila Pearl and Marion Blumenthal-Lizanne. So let's get right into this video. This video is going to contain sensitive topics and foul language. If you do not wish to continue, I suggest you click off the video now. You have been warned. Once more, Ruth said, we arrived in Holland as refugees, homeless and penniless. The first time had been in January 1939, 2 months after Ch8 and Walter's imprisonment in Buchenwald. Now it was summer of 1945. 6.5 years had passed. We had just barely managed to survive the camps. Walter was dead and I was a widow at the age of 37. My worry about my 2 young children was the only thing that gave me the strength to face the future. And yes, there was a new name for us. We were no longer refugees. Now we were displaced persons. To put it more accurately, we were stateless. Marion's memories of the return to Holland were more pleasant than Mama's and more filled with hope. I remember she said that after we left Trebets, we stopped in Leipzig, a much larger place also in eastern Germany. There was an army hospital there where my leg, still very painful, was given further treatment. The weather was very hot. I recall sitting at a long wooden table and being served cold beer in large mugs. It was not unusual in Europe to give children and even babies a little beer to drink to nourish their bodies. My body must have craved the nourishment, for the beer tasted delicious. Later in the journey, we stopped at a cloister near Ch8, the Dutch city that is wedged between Belgium and Germany. I thought it very exciting to be able to stand with one leg in Holland and one in Belgium while waving an arm in farewell in the direction of Germany. From there we went on to Amsterdam. Although the city had suffered much during the war and many of its trees had been cut down for firewood, it seemed a very luxurious place to me. On our arrival, we stayed briefly with Papa's cousins, whom I knew as Tante Gerda and Uncle Ernest. Uncle Ernest, the Lviv, was Jewish, but Tante Gerda was not. He had managed to conceal his identity from the Nazis during the war. I thought that they and their 17-year-old daughter, Ingrid, were the most handsome people I had ever known. Tante Gerda wore her smooth dark hair in a French knot known as a chignon at the nape of her neck. She understood at once how much I craved small treats of food and clothing. I was still scrawny and underweight, and my hair had not grown in yet. Also, I wore glasses, which I had to wear from the age of 4 because my eye muscles were not in balance. As a result of this problem, I was slightly cross-eyed. Marianne could vividly recall the de Leveve's second-floor apartment in a tall, narrow Amsterdam building. Although their home was comfortably furnished, the de Leve's, like other Dutch citizens, still suffered from the war shortages. All clothing was rationed and coupons had to be saved up. But Tante Gerda managed to buy Marianne her first piece of new clothing, a flower-patterned summer dress. Another hard-to-obtain item was chewing gum. Marianne was intrigued with the unusual confection, and when Uncle Ernest offered her an allowance equivalent to about 10 cents a week, she eagerly saved her coins to buy a single Ch8. I don't know how many weeks, Marianne said. I kept that one piece of chewing gum each day. I would chew it, carefully wrap it up, and then chew it again the next day. I also remember how upset I became when I got a stain on the flower dress that Tante Gerda had bought me. I wore it one day on an outing to an amusement park where I rode the carousel, and the painted horse on which I was seated went up and down. I must have hit my chin. As a result, my tooth bit into my lip, causing some drops of blood to fall onto my beautiful new dress. Tante Gerda, though, was not angry. She was comforting and reassuring, all of which made me feel even more unhappy and undeserving. This day with the de Leve family could not last, however. Soon Mama and Marianne and Albert were transferred to a former Jewish convalescent home in Amsterdam. The 8-story building had been converted into a temporary shelter for 75 to 100 displaced persons. Although the accommodations were simple, life was no longer filled with fear and uncertainty. Hunger had ceased to be an everyday sensation, and it was possible to bathe, to wear freshly washed clothing, even to brush one's teeth every morning. In October, Albert reached his 13th birthday and became bar mitzvah in a small, quiet ceremony at an Amsterdam synagogue. So that he would have a special gift to mark the occasion, Mama sold Papa's pocket watch and bought Albert a ring. Mama's worries about the family's future were far from over, however. The children needed to be educated, and Ruth herself had no way of providing a livelihood for the 3 of them. Perhaps, she reasoned, Papa's plan of emigrating to Palestine was the best idea after all. Hundreds of thousands of displaced Jews, broken and impoverished families like the Blumenthals, hoped to be able to make a new start in Palestine. True, the British were still limiting immigration to only about 1,500 a month. and conditions in the desert-like land were harsh and often inhospitable, but there were plans afoot to develop a Jewish state in the Palestine, one that would become a permanent home for the Jews. So soon after Albert's bar mitzvah, Marion said he and I were sent to a youth Aliyah home in a small town of Bussum, and about an hour's train ride south of Amsterdam. There we would be prepared for Aliyah, or immigration, for the future Jewish homeland. We would be taught both the Hebrew language and the Orthodox religion. The home was on spacious grounds with a vegetable garden, chickens and rabbits, and Albert and I had the company of the 20 or so other children, ranging from 8 to 18. Some were orphans, while others, like us, had one surviving parent. Mr. and Mrs. Brinbaum, who ran the home and did the teaching, were also survivors of Westerbork and Bergen-Belsen. They had 6 children, 2 of whom were close in age to Albert and me, their daughter Susie and their son Zivi. While living and studying in the youth Aliyah home, Marian also began her secular education in Dutch at a nearby monastery school. The teaching was patient and caring. Dutch was a new language for 11-year-old Marian, as was Hebrew. Before that, she had known only German. Albert, too, was now learning Dutch. He and Zivi Brindblom, along with the other teenagers from the home, commuted daily by train to a secondary school in Amsterdam. Ruth, meantime, remained in Amsterdam. She had moved in with Walter's sister Rosie, who lived in hiding in Holland during the war, and she was studying to become a beautician and manicurist. It was during this time that Uncle Ernest offered to have Marian's eyes condition corrected. "I'm so ashamed now," Marian said. "When I think of how I behaved. Uncle Ernest arranged for me to come to Amsterdam by train. This was a surprise for my mother. He met me at the station and took me to the hospital where the operation was to be performed. I was, of course, quite nervous, but I was also happy at the thought of having my eyes straightened, and perhaps not having to wear glasses anymore. At the hospital, Uncle Ernest put me in the hands of the nurses who were to prepare me for the operation. Somehow I was left lying on the stretcher in a room all by myself for what seemed like a very long time. No one came to my side. No one was there to reassure me. Suddenly I was seized with panic. Maybe it was my years in the camps that told me that I must escape and save myself. In any case, I jumped up from the stretcher, found my belongings, ran all the way to the railway station, and returned to Bussum. What a terrible thing to do, but patient and kind as always, Uncle Ernest understood the reason for my flight. The surgery was rescheduled, and this time he insisted on being allowed to remain at my side until I was wheeled into the operating room. Mama, too, was there, and the operation was a success. I recovered quickly, and my eyes were soon able to function normally. Ruth finally completed her beautician's training and received her certification qualifying her to give facials, manicures, and pedicures. Learning the terminology for the muscles and tissues in Dutch had been difficult for her, but she was determined to succeed. Once she was certified, she bought a bicycle to travel to the homes of her clients. Her visits with Mary and Albert, however, were limited to once a week at most. Either she came to Bussum by train or the children traveled to Amsterdam. Even though the Birnbams were like second parents to us, and Susie became my dear friend, which she has remained to this day, Marian said I was terribly lonely for my mother. I had learned in Bergen-Belsen to surpass my feelings and not to cry out even in physical pain, so I kept these deep anxieties to myself in order not to worry my mother, but often I was close to hysteria, and I could hear my heart pounding in my chest, as if it were about to burst. As the time drew closer for the planned voyage from Holland to Palestine, the Bloemthals learned that the immigration was to be the children's transport only, and that the group would have to travel illegally by way of the island of Cyprus in the eastern Mediterranean. Ruth was not allowed to accompany Mary and Albert. She would have to make her own arrangements and hope to arrive at a later date. After all we had been through, Mama said, I could not possibly risk such a separation. Often the illegal ships were old and leaky, and if the British came upon such a ship, they would be forced to return to Europe. How could I put my children's lives in danger again? So at once I went about seeing what we could do to immigrate as a family to the United States, as Walter and I had originally intended. Again, it was necessary to obtain an affidavit from a family member or other sponsor in America, as well as a visa and other papers. This time the affidavit was generously offered by a brother of Tante Rosie's husband, a warm and caring man whom the Bloomfields had never met. His name was Arnold Wolfe. The remaining arrangements took time, but there was one piece of very good news. The Holland American line still had it on record that the Bloomfields had paid their passage for 4 in 1938 when they first planned to sail from Rotterdam to New York on the Nieuwe Amsterdam. Now, nearly 10 years later, the passage money was still on deposit and could be applied to a sailing on the SS Veendam. The cost of the sailing had gone up, but Papa's share would be passed on to the others, and only a small sum needed to be added. What an exciting time, Marian said. When we finally had everything in readiness and our passage date approached, it was April 1948. I was nearly 13 and a half, had filled out and grown taller. Also, I had very definite ideas about what kind of wardrobe I wanted for this sailing and for my arrival in New York. Clothing and shoes were still rationed in Holland, so Mama and I had constant arguments about what items the valuable coupon should be used for. One thing I needed badly was a pair of new shoes. Mama had to give up her shoe coupon so that I could have them, and of course she felt I should choose a pair of sensible black or brown leather Oxfords. By this time we were buying my shoes one size too big because I was growing so rapidly. When I looked at those terrible canal boats Mama wanted me to get, I was practically in tears. I'm going to have to leave it off right there, and I will see you guys in part 2 of chapter 8 in the next video. Bye.